Well, hi everyone, my name's Ian and I want to welcome you to Online Church today. It's great that you can join us, and an extra special welcome to all our kids who are watching in today too. We hope you've been coping really well with being stuck at home in the last week and a bit, and I hope that online school hasn't been that tough. Make sure you keep at it. Just quickly to let you know what our awesome kids leaders have been hard at work doing, they've been making online kids church again. So why not head over to our kids YouTube page in a little while and watch that together as we start our journey through the book of 2 Samuel together. Also, there are some activity sheets up there on the family resources page on our website, so you can print those out and work them through too. You might need mum or dad's help to be able to do that, so make sure you keep on nagging them until they give you permission to be able to do that. Well, we're looking at the book of 2 Samuel this term, and you might need to know a little bit about what has happened before we get to the start of 2 Samuel. There has to be a book of 1 Samuel, right? And where does that fit in the Bible's timeline? Well, last year we learned all about God's big story, and 2 Samuel fits about halfway through the Old Testament. God's people were a really big nation, and they were living in the land that God had promised them. They were constantly fighting with all the other nations around them though. And then right at the start of the book, we meet a lady named Hannah. Now Hannah sadly couldn't have any children, and so she went to the temple to pray and ask for God's help to give her a son. God answered her prayer, and she had a son named Samuel. That's who the book is named after. Now Samuel became a very important leader in Israel, but God was still the most powerful one who was in charge. He showed that one day when God's ark was stolen by the Philistines. Now they thought that they were more powerful than God, but God fought for himself, and the Philistines became so afraid that they returned the ark when they realized how powerful God really was. Well, God led his people well. He really was their king. But the people wanted a king just like the other nations around them. They wanted somebody who was big and tall and mighty, who would lead them out into battle. Well, Samuel warned them about what would happen if they had a king like that. But they still said, "We want a king, we want a king." And in the end, God gave them a king after their own heart. You see, he gave them King Saul. Now Saul was big and tall, but he wasn't the best king. He wasn't a king who was after God's heart. And he showed that by doing what he wanted to and not what God wanted. You see, Saul didn't lead the people like God wanted him to. And so God said, "You may want Saul as king, but I have rejected him as king, and I will raise up a better king, a king after God's own heart." Well, enter David. David was a young shepherd boy, but David was somebody who trusted God. And so Samuel went and made David king. He was a king after God's heart, and he showed that when he went into fight against a giant from the Philistines named Goliath. David trusted that God would help him win the battle, and so God won the battle. God showed that he was with David, and so Saul became a bit jealous. Saul tried time and time to kill David, but he failed each and every time. David ran away from Saul because, well, he would never raise a hand against God's anointed king. God even delivered Saul into David's hand twice, once in a cave where David cut off the corner of his robe, and then also once when Saul was camped and David's men stole his spear and his water jug. One of the men with David said, "This time God has let you get your hands on your enemy. I'll pin him to the ground, and with one thrust of his own spear we'll kill him." But David said, "Don't kill him," David whispered back. "The Lord will punish anyone who kills his chosen king." God was with David, but David would never harm Saul. He trusted God. If David was to be king, he would become God's king by trusting God and not taking matters into his own hands. And just that happened. A little bit later, Saul went out into battle, and he lost the battle and he died. How would David respond to the news that God's king Saul was dead? Would he be really happy because finally he could be king? Or would he be really sad? Well, we're going to find out a little bit about that in Kids Church today. So make sure you head over to our YouTube page, to Kids Church Online, as we look at 2 Samuel chapter 1 and find out some more. But how about I pray before we go? Let me pray. Dear God, thank you that you are the world's great King. And thank you that David was somebody who trusted you. Please help us as we learn from 2 Samuel this term about David's kingship and about how he was a great king but not a perfect king. Please help us therefore love your forever King Jesus more and more. Amen. We'll see you later.